Hey guys, welcome back to DCS World. I'm Spudknocker, as always, and today I thought I'd put together a little guide on how to optimize your settings for DCS World to get the best detail and the best looking picture you possibly can, and still get good frame rates hopefully, and make your experience in DCS World as pretty and as smooth as possible. I think DCS World is pretty amazing. Beyond it just its flying parts, it's super high fidelity. I also think it's almost a piece of art. It's just so beautiful at times. So I wanted to show my settings and where I find my tips and tricks to help make DCS World as good as I can make it. If you like the video, please like and subscribe. I would always appreciate that. And if you like more of these kinds of videos, please let me know in the comment section, and I will hopefully make some more in the future, if that's what you guys like. So without further ado, let's go ahead and look at the different tools you have at your disposal, hopefully, and we will dive right in. Okay guys, before we get started taking a look at settings and different things you can do to optimize DCS World and your machine, I just wanted to lay out my specs for my computer. I have a Intel i7-7700K and a GTX 1080 by Gigabyte, as well as 16 gigabytes of RAM at 31/2200 gigahertz, and I have DCS World installed on a solid-state drive, and I have a secondary solid-state drive that I use for ancillary things and the operating system. So one thing I will talk about due to this ongoing memory issue here in DCS World is my page file. I know this is a very old-fashioned, quote-unquote around old-fashioned because it wasn't that long ago, way to increase your memory size in your computer back when memory was super expensive. And it's a really good way to help ease the burden of the memory offload issue that we have here in DCS World at the moment. I know that it's being worked on and hopefully will be resolved soon, but just thought I'd throw that in here as well, just to help you guys out as much as possible for people who may not be able to get any more RAM or have systems that just won't accommodate any more RAM. Alright, so let's hop on into the settings. First place to start off, especially for newer players who may not be so familiar with it, would of course be your settings here in DCS World. It's just that little gear up in the upper left hand corner, and this is just kind of an overview of my settings. I have my texture set to high, my terrain texture set to high. Civilian traffic, I like to keep that off. I tend to think that induces some stutters, especially in the Caucasus map, not so much in the NTTR map, so I sometimes change that, turn it on, turn it off, based on my needs. Water effects, I leave that on high. I think the water is certainly one of the areas where DCS World certainly shines in comparison to other simulation titles or other big budget games, to be honest. Visible range, I keep that on high. The Ultra and Extreme they look pretty good, but I don't think that there's enough of a increase in how far you can see or an increase in the graphical fidelity that is high enough to really merit choosing those two. So I think high is pretty much where most people want to be. Heat blur, I keep to low. Once again, the heat blur is super cool looking and really good, but I don't see enough of a increase in the beauty of the heat blur to merit turning that guy on to high. Just my opinion, you may have other opinions. Shadows, I keep that on low. Most shadows you're going to see are going to be on the ground in terms of taxiing around, seeing the shadow of maybe trucks parked nearby, hangars, or your own aircraft. And low, I feel, is just fine for that. I have turned that up to high or medium, but once again, I don't see enough of an increase in the beauty to really merit that one so much. Resolution, of course, that depends on your own monitor. I like to decrease my resolution to 1920 by 1080 for recording gameplay or videos in any fashion. I have a 1440 by 1920 screen that I use for outside recording. And these same settings seem to work just fine for that. Aspect ratio is set automatically. Monitors, I just have one screen going. I know a lot of people have multiple screens. Resolution of cockpit displays, I keep that at 512. You can, of course, increase that, especially if you have a higher resolution screen. That may look a little better, but it's not necessarily a necessary thing. Multi-sample anti-aliasing, that didn't come out too well. I leave that on 4, and we'll talk about that more when we get to our NVidia settings. Depth of field, I turn that off. That really lowers your frame rate if you have this guy on. And I don't think it looks that great, in my opinion. It looks really cool for certain video effects and things, so if I ever make a music video where I think I need depth of field or something, I'll turn that back on. Lens effects, this is up to you. It doesn't really change much. It just adds some lens flare or in your case, any case, dirt that can get on the camera. HDR is blurred out because I have deferred shading on. I think 2.5, to really take advantage of the beauty of 2.5, you really need to have deferred shading on. For lower end systems, that will definitely affect your frame rate for sure. Clutter and grass, have that turned all the way up. Trees visibility, I have that turned down to 85. I think it saves a few frames, especially on the Caucasus map, where the trees are just super prevalent. And that doesn't really change the amount of trees you can see. It just kind of reduces the amount of trees that are rendered just outside of visible distance, in my opinion. I'm no expert on that. Preload radius, I have that all the way jacked up as much as possible. That just means that the area around your aircraft when you start the mission is already pre-rendered and all the assets loaded into your RAM or page file, as we'll talk about later. Chimney smoke density, I just have that set to the default 1. Gamma, another thing that's kind of a personal preference, is I like to keep it on 2. Before in 2.1, I had it on like 1.6 or 1.7, but in 2.5 things have changed a bit, so I tend to keep that on 2. I know a lot of people are having issues with flying at night and it being too dark at night. If you turn your gamma up when you're flying only at night, that can help with those issues. Anisotrophic filtering, I don't really see a big difference between a lot of these. The biggest difference I see is the amount of shimmering in trees. If you have it turned up all the way to 16x, your trees and fences, especially on NTTR, and maybe mountain tops and sides from far away will shimmer a bit more. So I have that turned down to 8, while still making textures look pretty good. Terrain object shadows, I have that set to default, and that really makes the terrain pop. Having that off, you don't get any shadows in your valleys or around trees or anything like that, and it makes the terrain look pretty boring. And that just kind of defeats the whole purpose of being in a beautiful flight simulator like DCS World. Once again, just my opinion, just trying to give people just a reference point, I guess you could say. Cockpit global illumination, I have that set to on. I kind of go back and forth on this. On 2.5, update 5 that we're on right now, I don't find that this really makes a big difference, so I just leave it to on. Disable aero interface, I'm not completely sure what that does, to be honest. VSync, I have that turned on, and full screen I have turned on. I know that people have issues with frame rates if full screen is not turned on, so I recommend that people do that just straight out of the box. Scale GUI is more for multiple screens and VR, so I don't really use VR right now, and I don't have multiple screens at the moment, being a starving college student, so scale GUI not really apply to me. Alright, so that's a look at our in-game DCS World settings, and we'll move on to the external settings that I use. Okay guys, so we're here on my desktop, and I wanted to show you some other resources and ways to improve your experience in DCS World as much as possible, especially with the memory management issue that is cropping up at the moment. So I would say your biggest resource in terms of finding advice for getting the best settings in DCS World would certainly be the ED forums, Eagle Dynamics forums. You can see the URL up here, and I'll put a link down in the description. Yeah, the two biggest things would probably be the community news, as well as the DCS World 1.5 and 2.5 threads. That's probably the best advice I've found is in there. You've also got things like Hoggit. Let's see, where'd Hoggit go? Hoggit. That can really be a good resource for finding advice on settings and things like that, as well as various DCS World Facebook groups and things. I find that Hoggit is probably a better place than the DCS World Facebook groups, but that's not a knock on those, but just easier to find information in my opinion. Now, of course, your next biggest thing is going to be your 3D settings. Now, a lot of these I'm not going to take time to explain all of them. I'll just kind of show off my settings and kind of my simple rationale for those settings. Because multi-sample anti-aliasing is not broken, but kind of not working super optimally in DCS World itself, I tend to go with enhance application settings for my anti-aliasing mode and set a higher anti-aliasing setting in the NVidia settings than in my DCS World settings. I think that helps kind of override the DCS World while still letting DCS World kind of organically do some anti-aliasing. Transparency I have set to as high as possible. I don't really like seeing artifacts around canopies and things. This is more prevalent, I think, in older modules like the F5E Tiger II or the F86. Those tend to have more artifacts on the transparencies, in my opinion, than newer ones like maybe the Mirage or the AV8B. That may be due to two different companies making the 3D models for those airplanes, but I really have no idea. I'm not an expert there. Gamma correction I have set to on. I think that helps enhance the color in DCS World a bit, but that's up to your discretion. Anisotropic filtering, I just have that set to the same setting as I have in DCS World. I think that actually overrides the DCS World setting, but that's all right. FXAA, I don't see much of a improvement with that on or off, so I just leave it off to just reduce any kind of stuttering I can. CUDA GPUs, I have that on all. That's not for DCS World, that's just simply for video editing and things of that nature. Now, texture filtering is something that I've played with a lot in DCS World, and I think I've finally hit on something that works really well for me, and at least to my eye looks really nice. And so for sample optimization, I have that to off, and that way it doesn't try to get more performance at the expense of reduced quality of the picture. Negative LOD bias, that's kind of the same thing. I have that set to clamp just to get as good of a picture as I can. I think this one really affects the canopy graphics in older modules, like I explained before, the F5 or the F86, MiG-21, MiG-15, any other older kind of modules. Not a knock on those guys, but just a thing I've noticed. Texture filtering quality. You may get different things that you would rather do if your system's better or not as good as mine. I just go with the straight quality. That's kind of what NVIDIA recommends. Trilinear optimization, another thing that is debatable whether that really affects DCS World or not. I leave that to off just for the same reason, to get as good of a picture as I can, even if it's at the expense of frames, because I really just am someone who loves seeing the beautiful picture of things. Let's see, anything else here? Not necessarily anything else left in here. I would really recommend reading up on all of these things so that you can really make an informed decision based on your system as to what would work best for you, for your monitor, for your hard drive, for your CPU, for your graphics card, all these different kinds of things. For you guys on the red team with AMD graphics cards, I'm sure there's something similar to this that you'll have to read up on your own, because I have never had an AMD graphics card. Okay, so we'll move on from our 3D settings, and we'll head on over to the GeForce Experience. Go over to drivers here. There is a driver ready for me to download. I tend to not adopt them right away unless they come out like on the same day or near the same day as an update to DCS World, but I update them eventually as long as I read that there's no huge issues or problems that crop up either on the Eagle Dynamics forums or in other places like you know, PC gaming forums and things. I'm not super hung up on this, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. If you ever have an issue with a driver, you can always roll it back. Now, a big thing when it comes to optimizing DCS World as much as possible is to have DCS World installed on a solid-state drive. I'm lucky enough to have 2 solid-state drives that I use for DCS World. My main drive is my C drive, obviously, and my secondary is my D drive. Both SSDs, like I said, and because of that, I use a page file, a rather large page file, to help smooth over any of the memory issues that we're having right now in DCS World. So I will show you how to take care of that and increase your page file in case you have it turned off or aren't using it. So you want to go to this PC right here. You want to right click that guy, hit properties, and you'll be brought to this page right here. Alright, so to take a look at your page file to see if you have one or how big it is, you want to go to Advanced System Settings up here. Once you're on the basic information about your computer page, Advanced System Settings, you want to go to the Advanced tab. Usually when you first open it up, it'll pop up on your computer name tab. Go over to Advanced. You want to go to Performance, hit Settings here, go to Advanced, and you'll see Virtual Memory right here. And you'll see the size of your current virtual memory allotment. If it says 0, or if it's too big or not big enough, you just hit Change. You select how much you want on each drive. I have a bigger one on my secondary drive, a smaller one on my primary drive. I know that mine is probably way too big and it's not being used, but I figure since I've got room on the drives, I'll just go big or go home on this. So it can't hurt, that's for sure, unless you're hurting for room on your drives, which I'm not, thankfully. So you just click a drive, put your initial size or your maximum size, and you hit Set. You can do that on your other one. Hit Set. You know, type in your amount, hit Set, and click OK. It'll prompt you to restart your computer, and you'll just hit Restart. It'll restart, and you'll be ready to go with your page file system. One thing to note is it is measured in megabytes, not gigabytes, so that's why these numbers are quite high. But 1,000 megabytes is a gigabyte, so if you look at that, I have 64 gigabytes and 68 gigabytes there. So just make sure you keep that in mind, because if you put 64 or just 68 there, you'll have that measured in megabytes, which is rather tiny. Okay, so come out of that. Okay, so now that we're back on our desktop here, another tool you can have in your proverbial toolbox. I don't use it quite so much anymore as when I had a lower end system, but some sort of memory management system, like I have Advanced System Care. The website looks a little sketchy, but the software works really well. Is a way to have a more control over what goes into your RAM, what programs are running in the background, and this is, like I said, more important for maybe a lower end system, and that way you can turn it on and RAM released and programs stopped. That way you can squeeze as much RAM as you possibly can for your DCS World install. Important for multiplayer and the like, now that we have this little memory issue that is hopefully going to go away. So I'll just turn that off for now since I don't need it. There are many out there. The advanced system care thing just seems to be the one that I've latched onto at the moment. So that is pretty much it when it comes to things you can do. I hope this guide helps you guys out, and hopefully you can get your system up and going as well as possible. Thanks a lot, guys. Fly safe, and can't wait for the Hornet and your Persian Gulf map. So thanks a lot, guys.